clever lad. Charming story.
I'm not finished.
Well, that's a little graphic for children, wouldn't you say?
Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons was released in 2013 and developed by Starbreeze Studios, a Swedish developer that most of you, if any of you, know probably by their, I'd argue, biggest release, the Chronicles of Riddick's tie-in Escape from Butcher Bay. While Brothers is usually categorized as an adventure, probably because that's about as vague as you can go with genre definitions. Personally, I would rather describe it as, a 3D platformer of sorts, with rudimentary puzzle elements in it and a heavy focus on the narrative. The game takes place in what I would describe as a Scandinavian-inspired fantasy world, wherein you take control of two nameless brothers, the older brother who is bigger, stronger, and more reasonable, and a smaller brother who's weaker but is more slender, fits through obstacles that the bigger brother can't pass, and personality-wise is more on the mischievous side. Now, the game has two major gimmicks to it, one being the control scheme and one being the way how it approaches storytelling. The control scheme requires you to play the game with a controller, and I truly mean it requires you. The game cannot be played with mouse and keyboard, and if I'm not utterly mistaken, the game doesn't even allow you to start, the game doesn't even start up, to be precise, if you don't have a functioning controller plugged into your PC. Now, the special part here is that each side of the controller is dedicated to the control of one of the brothers. The left side is affixed to the big brother, so with the left analog stick you control his movement, with the left trigger button you let him interact with the world, and the same holds true respectively for the smaller brother and the right side of the controller. Additionally, you can rotate the camera to the left and the right with the right and left shoulder button. This of course means A, that you control both brothers simultaneously but separately from another, but that also means that the actual gameplay is fairly limited. You really are just walking through the world, and when you come across an object or an obstacle, you press the action button and then lead the respective brother to wherever you want him to go. As for the second gimmick, the narrative style, Starbreeze tried what they described as interactive storytelling, or at least I think that's the term they use. Don't nail me down on that one. But essentially, they're trying to tell you everything you can learn about the world by having the characters outright show things to you, or by you interacting with things and interpreting whatever insight you might garner from the reactions of the characters and, well, the people around them. Now, the characters still actually talk with each other, but it really is some kind of Sims-like gibberish, although I have it on good authority that it is Scandinavian-sounding pointless gibberish. So while you have to retrieve any kind of information about the characters or the game world from interaction with the world, the characters still at least pretend to learn from it or interact with each other via language. The premise itself is fairly simple. We learn at the beginning of the game, via a flashback, already violating that interactive storytelling thingy, that the two eponymous brothers no longer have a mother, since at some undisclosed point in the past, the mother drowned while she was out on the stormy sea in a dinghy with the smaller brother for some reason. Shortly after, the smaller brother hallucinates the spirit of his mother and then learns that the father got sick with, again, nondescript disease, and after a short and fruitless visit at the local doctor's house, they learn that the only way to save their father is to travel the countryside to some magical tree and get nondescript healing item from said tree. From here on out, the story takes you through 8 distinct regions of the world before you eventually and actually do reach your goal, although not quite in the way that the brothers hoped to at the beginning of the little journey. Now, levels 1 and 2, the brothers' village as well as the immediate outskirts of that village respectively, are essentially your entry level slash tutorial levels. In the village itself, you learn about the basic controls and how you can have the brothers interact with each other or coordinate them on certain obstacles. Simultaneously, of course, introducing you to some of the most basic and most recurring riddles, or puzzles rather, that you will encounter on your journey. It also introduces you to the benches, a curious little element of the game. These benches are basically strewn throughout the entire landscape wherever you go, no matter how hostile the territory is. And there you can sit down either as one of the two brothers, or if you can time it right, both brothers simultaneously, upon which the camera will pan onto a wonderful scenic shot that, well, does in fact give you a nice sight to enjoy. Although it kinda counters the implied urgency of the, journey to save your father's life. Level 2, as mentioned before, is then not much different than level 1, other than maybe in the atmosphere and the mood. You encounter fewer humans, you come across your first fantastical creature in the form of what I describe as some kind of a troll or a giant. Some bloke who has mushrooms growing out of his back. In summary, it introduces you to this open, curious, but strangely simultaneously discomforting mood of, well, going on an adventure in an open world. Although, once again, I want to emphasize that this is merely a mood thing, both in the first and the second level, and quite frankly in the rest of the levels as well. You are on a very strict, straight path. There is no diverging from it in any way, shape, or form. Level 3 then leads you underground into, well, I don't know how to describe it, some kind of cave complex with mines and machinery. Again, given the nature of how the narrative is conveyed in this game, you don't really learn too much about the details, so your creativity, your mind fills in the gaps here and there. In essence, you encounter that there are some machines underground and trolls who might or might not be related to the giant who helped you in Act 1 seem to keep running the show down there, although you personally don't really encounter many of them until the end of that very level, where you discover the wife of your previous benefactor giant and the brothers committing their first casual murder, as far as I can tell. About 45 minutes into the game, you'll then reach level 4, of course dependent on how fast or slow you personally advance. But in any way, the game seems to think that enough time passed that it has to remind you with a little cutscene, again, kinda counterintuitive to the whole interactive narrative approach, that your father is still alive, is still dying, and that you still actually have a purpose in your little adventure. It's also where you learn that the time you spent in front of the screen is in no way, shape, or form close to the time that the characters take traversing the world. As level 4 starts at nighttime in what I would describe as the first level that is actively hostile towards the brothers. You wake up to what I can only describe a bunch of timber wolves, sorry, not timber, dire wolves, trying to eat you. You're shooting them away with fire. You then come across a cemetery, which, why is there a cemetery in the middle of a cursed wood? And I'm not being hyperbolic here. The word wood is actually cursed, as later on some sentient tree stumps who shoot out of a wall try to kill the smaller brother. I'm not even kidding here. At the end of this level, we also come across once again a character trait that I have to apologize forgot to mention in my summary of the first level. The smaller brother, being traumatized by the death of his mother via drowning, can no longer enter large bodies of water. I'm hesitant to just call it hydrophobia or say that he can't swim, although that would seem likely. Again, you never have a chance to explore the details of anything. long story short, the smaller brother can't swim or doesn't want to swim, so gameplay wise, you have to cling onto the larger brother who then carries his smaller brother whenever you cross a body of water. Except in this level. Look, you will see it probably in the footage right here, but again, this is what the game sets up. Just roll with it for now. Now, given that there are overall 8 levels in this game, it may sound a bit weird when I say that level 5 seems like the true halfway point of the game. First and foremost, I feel very confident in saying that this is probably the largest concise level in the entire game. Every other level before and quite frankly after is relatively short and, again, depending on your personal progress, rather quickly left behind. Level 5 is fairly big, and whereas previous levels seem to be dedicated to a specific mood, like, safe and sound in the village, kind of adventures in Act 2, uh, mysterious and dangerous in Act 3, and outright hostile in Act 4, Level 5 has a mixture of all those elements and thus feels, and I emphasize feels, the most natural out of the bunch. You start out with potentially saving a suicidal man who just lost his family, who died when their house burned down, their house that was planted at the very edge of a cliff for some reason. You then take a ride across the mountainside with 2 goats that you find in an unattended enclosure. Then you find an inventor of sorts who has a weird organ instrument up there as well as a gliding machine, which you then use to fly through a cave onto an abandoned tower that is apparently inhabited by a giant, where you free what I can only describe as a baby griffin, who then flies you to a little platform that just happens to be on the way, I guess, and then dies. Look, I will address the weird and inconsistent stuff that happens in this game later on in the video. I just want you to know at this point, it's not that I don't notice it or ignore it. I am aware. For brevity's sake, however, I will address it later. Okay? Okay, we're good? Fine. Level 6 is my personal contender for most curious level in the entire game. See, once again, I have the feeling that they try to go for a more darker or heavier mood. You know, what with the baby griffin that just helped you dying in front of your eyes. And oh yeah, Section 5 also concluding with yet another flashback of the bigger brother, reminding him once again that he very much loves his father and that maybe they should stop sitting down on all the benches and get on with the whole finding the cure quest they have. Level 6, however, is a mountainside that clearly has been the place of a bloody battle between giants. That I could actually deduce skillfully by observing all the massive bleeding corpses of giants that I come across. Now, the reason why I describe this level as a curious case is, well, from the description, you probably imagine a rather gruesome scene. However, the rather casual and, quite frankly, somewhat nonchalant way in which both the brothers, the smaller one supposedly being rather sheltered and naive due to his young age still, are basically chopping corpses apart and jovially interacting with certain objects in the environment, to keep up the consistency of the game. Hell, even when they go through a waterfall that basically is a waterfall of blood due to being intermingled with the bleeding giant corpses, their reaction to being completely layered in another living being's or formerly living being's blood is that of mild annoyance. Anyway, the level is once again a really short one and ends with you coming across of tribesmen who seem to have captured a young girl and probably intended to sacrifice her to some kind of idol or god or whatever. The brother saving her with the clever idea of the younger brother stepping on the shoulders of the larger one, both of them intentionally drenching themselves in blood, and therefore somehow resembling an icon that, tribesmen seem to worship. You'll probably see this on the screen right now, what actually happens, but it really stretches the suspension of disbelief. Aforementioned rescued damsel in distress will accompany our brothers then in level 7, which I can easily dub as the snow level. Now, you don't control her or really interact with her directly, she basically just follows you along and performs rather impressive feats for what seems to be some wayfish girl that has limbs so thin they seem to be capable of breaking upon encountering a stiff breeze. I wonder if they're setting something up here. Oh well, whatever. After coming across a bunch of deep frozen corpses, an abandoned village, and the realization that the village is not abandoned but has been attacked or emptied out by an invisible giant yeti, because any combination of two of these traits wouldn't be horrifying enough. You run by a beautifully scenic sunrise, sun something, before you enter a cave and are surprised to learn that the wayfish, yet exceptionally athletic girl, is in fact a, a drider. Okay, yeah, she's a half human, half spider creature. I mean, not that this is too weird for the game. We've seen plenty of weirder stuff so far. It's just I didn't expect this in the worst possible way. Let's put it like this. But no worries. While the Drider may have surprised our brothers and is about to digest them, I think that's what's happening here, after all the obstacles that our brothers have faced, there is nothing that a bit of ingenuity, quick-wittedness, and brotherly cooperation cannot overcome. So how will they... Oh, okay. Well, I guess that's a way to end this happy fantastical journey. Yay. Well, at least it can't get any worse. Well, this little slip and slide ultimately drags the brothers exactly where they wanted to go. Once again, I'm not quite sure who made the map that the brothers used so far, but whoever made it must have had one fantastic journey here, I can tell you that. Well, after dragging his mortally injured bigger brother to the root of the tree, or to the base of the tree rather, the small brother climbs the tree, gets the magical healing water from the core of the tree, only to realize that, tragic twist, he is too late and his large brother has passed away. Now that might be sad, but the developers thought that it wasn't sad enough, so what follows is actually an interactive moment where the player has to control the smaller brother who, sobbing and crying, digs out a grave for his bigger brother and then makes you drag the corpse into the hole and bury him. Okay, that's certainly a darker mood shift. But hey, good news everybody, we at least don't have to walk the way back as a baby griffin. And quite frankly, I did some research on this. I don't know if it is the baby griffin that we thought was dead, or if it's a completely unrelated healthy baby griffin that for some magical reason knew about the brothers and really wanted to help them. But whatever the reason, the baby griffin drops off the smaller brother after an epic journey across the landscape back into the town where the smaller brother can immediately save his father. Well, actually, it drops him off somewhere at the foot of the outskirts of the village where he still has to climb around somewhere. And then by channeling both the spirit of his mother and the will of strength of his deceased brother, learns how to overcome his fear of water, manages to overcome the laws of physics, and then manages to save his father. The epilogue then shows that mother's tombstone has a little brother tombstone next to it. Dad breaks down in tears while being comforted by the smaller, now matured brother, before the small baby griffin taunts them both by letting out a triumphant screech while circling the city. which begs the question why I didn't just drop the little brother off in middle of the village, but whoever cares. Here, have some yodeling. I came across Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons years ago through a video by John Bain, better known as Totalbiscuit. I don't know how many people still actively remember the guy, but he was a pretty famous and influential online and video game critic who passed away in 2018. The reason why I got curious about the game is that Totalbiscuit in said video proclaimed that Brothers had officially, in his personal opinion, replaced the original Deus Ex as his favorite game of all times. Now, anyone who's known me for any amount of time probably knows that Deus Ex actually still to this very day, which makes me equally happy and sad, quite frankly, because at this point it's 20, 21 years old. But anyway, since nothing I saw in that video showed me anything that would be even on par with Deus Ex, I got curious, so I purchased the game, played through it, and got convinced that Totalbiscuit had contracted some kind of brain cancer. Ah, shit. Yeah, probably not surprising to anyone. I don't share Totalbiscuit's opinion on that game whatsoever. I mean, he and his passing were the reason why I even made a video about this game. Hell, given the fact that I made a long playthrough of Brothers way back when I started my channel, then made another playthrough of Brothers when I switched to my edited format, and now, since losing the footage, played through the game once again for this video. Brothers is probably the most played game of mine for this channel. However, while I admit that it does many things really nice, the typical two suspects of visual design and audio design fall under that category, all these playthroughs have done nothing to actually improve my opinion of Brothers. And the reason for that is, quite frankly, because I can summarize this entire game with the statement, nice concepts, mediocre execution. And this problem pretty much permeates every facet of the game. The visuals, yeah, the scenery is breathtakingly beautiful, but then the character animations seem kind of weird, flimsy, or stocky depending on the character. The audio, yeah, really good job. In fact, if you remember what I said about Act 2, where you felt the safety of the village dissipate and you traverse into the open wilderness, the ambient music really does a good job supporting that. But then in the strongest and most important moments where the music could really shine, they decided to let some chick yodel over the entire action, which is almost as unfitting as the yodeling in the Zack Snyder Wonder Woman movies. The controls, yeah, they're solid, they work, but they're fairly limited and they don't really do anything with it. I mean, considering what I described you with, you might expect that there are some really complicated puzzles where you have to time the interaction between the brothers, right? But no, it's really just all from beginning to end very basic and very simple stuff. Unless, of course, you in general have problems with coordinating your left and right hand separately from each other. But again, even then it does little more than making your progress slightly slower. But the biggest offender of all these categories is probably the narrative in its entirety, whether we're talking about the general plot or little narrative details. Now, some of you might say, oh well, Headbiter is spurging out about the story in a video game again. What else is new? But I think you can't really dismiss this critique so much because, as I pointed out before, Brothers heavily banks on the narrative. They are essentially one of the plenty of games who cut down on every element of game design in order to convey a story, to convey an experience. There's that fucking word over again. And still, after all this time since playing Oxenfree and Life is Strange and the fucking Telltale games, the simple reality remains, if you put all your eggs into the narrative basket, that element of the game needs to be impervious to criticism. And Brothers fails in that regard. Like, right away, the premise. Why would the two brothers go on this journey that they must know is life-threateningly dangerous, given that, a map exists and someone must have traversed this. If it is very likely that either one of them or both of them will likely die on this journey, spoiler alert, one of them does, all to potentially save the father. Remember, it was a race against time despite the casual progress of the game itself, so they might as well have succeeded and still have been too late to actually save their father. So, quite frankly, the most likely outcome would have been that both brothers would have died on their journey and the father would have succumbed to the illness, thus making the entire family go extinct. This becomes even worse when you go to the details. I mean, for time reasons, I won't go through every detail that I noticed, but whether it's the village boy that is just weirdly obsessed with blocking the brothers, whether it's the cemetery in the middle of a cursed wood, whether it's the suicidal griffin baby that must have been omniscient given that it knew where to fly the brothers without communicating with them for even a second, whether it's the corpses of the giants that are fresh enough to still spill red blood and yet must have been long enough for this weird tribe to build a fucking blood cult around their corpses. The story is just full of these inconsistencies. And by the way, how the fuck is this the shortest, most direct way from the village to the fucking tree? Again, I don't want to get into too much detail because it would swallow up too much time, but in essence, given that the narrative is a core, if not the core part of this game's design, this is just too fucking lazy. Now, many people who like this game will emphasize that they mainly like it because it evokes emotional responses. They've been crying when the brother died or when the little griffin died. But the thing is, while I can agree with that, because they are effective in evoking an emotional response, they do it in the laziest, cheapest way possible. Whereas a good writer builds up to an emotional moment, their emotional manipulation is a bit more clever and takes more work. Brothers takes the easy way out. If Brothers wants you angry, they show you a poor little animal in a cage. If Brothers wants you happy, they will show you that same animal soaring freely through the sky. And if they want you sad 5 seconds later, it just dies. Because how else would we create an emotional response from our audience? And again, you might argue that, well, it doesn't matter as long as the emotional response is there, but the problem is, if you play this game, or experience this game, while having your brain still active, you will notice that. And in that moment, not only will the game not evoke the emotional response the developers are going for, now everything around this moment breaks apart. Referring back to my question about the plot consistency of several points. Which at long last brings us to the ranking of this game. Now, I was pretty much always sure that ever since I established this ranking system, I like to say a month or so ago, that Brothers would be on the lower end of the scale, due to all the flaws that I just listed. For a while I was even pondering whether I should just dump it in D tier, because while I personally can't think of any game that is quite like Brothers, I can't imagine that there isn't another game out there that does the whole, narrative focus better than Brothers, or another game that does unique control schemes better than Brothers. And quite frankly, to me, having a unique control scheme alone is not much of a is not much of an argument to purchase a game. Ultimately, though, despite all the criticism that I can heap upon this game, I have to admit that while it had plenty of flaws and didn't quite blow me away, it also was a largely inoffensive romp. It never felt like a chore, or it never felt like I had to overcome myself to actually keep on playing. Least of all because ultimately it takes about 2 hours of going from beginning to end, which is why I decided with my original gut feeling and put it firmly into the C tier. If what I described to you and what you saw on the screen so far seems interesting enough for you, you can maybe get the game, although currently it is on goodoldgames.com for about $15. Personally, I would recommend to wait for a sale, which probably won't take long given how often sales come up nowadays. But there you have it. A minor little game that experimented with some mechanics and didn't quite hit the mark it was going for. And with that, we can conclude my first review video in this style, as well as what I hope to be the last time that I actually have to make a video about this particular game. As usual, if you have feedback, both positive or negative, feel free to drop them in a comment or any other way you know how to contact me. And in that sense, I wish you a nice day and see you around.